Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final review session. Woo, we're that close to the AP exam. Woo. Anyway, this is on Unit 7, La Belle Epoch and the Age of Nation States. It's a lot of information. Please make sure you do your reading. I want to see you guys be successful. You work way too hard. Don't give up now. Oh man, I wish I could be right there with you guys, but you know, please, 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 if you have any questions, feel free to ask. You know where I am, you know how to reach me. But other than that, yeah, we're that close to the AP exam. Can you believe it? Please make sure that you join the Zoom session that we're going to have, because I know that's going to have lots of information, of course, and then also you get graded for being there, staying there, not just showing up. But anyway, um, with that said, enjoy Unit 7, the last unit of AP Euro. Enjoy.
So we start off this unit with the Crimean War, one of the most useless wars in history. Now, this war starts off really, with Russia thinking that they could do what they want because everything is happening in Europe with all the revolutions. So they kind of had an idea that, oh, well, no one's watching us, we'll do this. So they wanted a warm water port. There's also disputes over who's controlling Jerusalem. They wanted to take Jerusalem away from the Ottomans. France, who was a Roman, Roman Catholic country, says no, Jerusalem is part of the RCC. The Russians say no, Jerusalem should be part of the Orthodox Church. There's this hundreds and hundreds of years of fighting over Jerusalem. Okay, but it's also a warm water port. Okay, or excuse me, Russia wanted a warm water port. So what's going to happen is they wanted the access to the Mediterranean, and eventually it becomes a war. It's not a major war by any means compared to like World War I or World War II, but we're talking about millions of people are gonna be a part of this. This is also the first major war. It's considered one of the first modern wars because there's a lot of new technology that's going to be used in this war. Also, it's going to be reported on, and word gets back to the other countries. Okay, and so it's going to, you're going to have reporters, you're going to have people watching the war. It's kind of weird, but the war occurs. Nicholas basically sees an opportunity to dominate the Ottomans, but the rest of Europe is like, no, 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 you can't do this. You have to respect the Ottoman Empire. So in reality, in this war, it's going to be Russia versus England, France, the Ottomans, and a small country called Piedmont, Sardinia, which was created after the French Revolution as a buffer state to stop to stop a revolution in France from spreading to anywhere else. Well, because it's Russia versus all these other countries, they asked their partner, "Hey, can you help us?" Their partner being Austria. Remember, Austria asked for Russian help against the Hungarians. Russia sent in 100,000 troops. The Hungarians were squashed. Now, a few years later, Russia asked for help from Austria. But this time, Austria is like, no, we got to stay neutral. We got our own issues. And that angers Russia. Well, what's going to happen is by the end of this, Russia is going to lose. You're going to have about 500,000 people die. And it was mainly because of the poor health care. This is where we get the Red Cross being created, and also we get the idea of nursing for women being created by Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale was an observer to this war. She was there with her family watching the war occur, and she noticed how many men are dying, not on the battlefield, but because of lack of care for their injuries. So that becomes extremely important for women down the road. Okay, so what's going to happen is this. By the end of this war, Piedmont, Sardinia is going to be, since they were on the winning side, that's going to be helpful for them to gain, to help unify Italy, which is their longer goal, okay, long-term goal. Russia seems weak, and really all the countries of Europe are looking weak. None of the countries really had a strong military in this, because you have all these old generals fighting a war with new equipment. and they just didn't know how to use it. Okay, so every country is going to go back into their country and start reforms, the military and other reforms as well. Okay, so what are some of the consequences of this war? First off, it ends the age of revolutions. From this point on, there won't be any revolutions, won't be any major wars other than the wars of unification. Um, and it does help women have another opportunity, another job outside the home instead of just teaching or home care or anything like that. Now it's going to be nursing. Okay. Now in Russia, after this war, Tsar Nicholas II is in power, and he starts a lot of reforms. Nicholas I dies during this war, and his successor Alexander II was more of a liberalist, and he goes for more reforms. So he's going to reform the military, but also reform society by eliminating serfdom in the Russian Empire. So now you can no longer own people, and this happens in 1861. Also, to help control the government, or make the federal government more powerful, he creates zemstvos. Zemstvos are your local governments that collect taxes and enforce laws locally. So it's kind of a federal government at the local level. So when we're talking about Italian and German unification, you have to remember they both occurred at the same time and they really overlap. But to make things easier, I separate them first with the Italian unification, followed by the German unification. Now, in reality, you don't need to know every single step, but I would know the major players, the obstacles for unification, and overall just the major concepts. Don't worry about what came first, what came next, etc. Okay, so when we look at Italian unification, the Italians have been trying to unify for a while. In 1830, 1848, we saw those revolutions get squashed by the Habsburgs mainly. Okay, the Carbonari and Mazzini leading the Young Italians. It fails. Now, there are three major obstacles in Italian unification. The first one being the Bourbon family, the second one being the Habsburg family, because these two families control a good portion of the Italian peninsula, and they don't want to give it up. And the third obstacle is the Pope. The Pope is not wanting to unify Italy because he feels by a unified Italy, the Pope, the Church, will lose the Papal States and lose a lot of influence in the region. So those three are the major obstacles in Italian unification. But what they do not know is the power of Cavour. Cavour is the head, he's the prime minister of Piedmont, Sardinia, and Piedmont, Sardinia is going to take the lead in unification. Piedmont, Sardinia is in the northwestern part of Italy, and they are their own country. Now, in Piedmont, Sardinia, they have modernized the economy, modernized the military. They have really prospered, okay? And their goal is to drive Austria and also the Bourbons out of Italy, okay? And he says, alliances and diplomacy is better than rebellions, okay? So use alliances, use diplomacy first before any rebellions. This is going to be a realpolitik kind of move. Realpolitik is a new way of thinking for this time period, and it's a way of politics of the real. Okay, it's not necessarily moral. It's whatever's needed. Okay, to bring betterment to your country, whether it's moral or amoral. It doesn't matter. So Cavour is going to use politics and diplomacy to unify Italy with some fighting. Cavour was an interesting man. He was tough-minded. He was pragmatic. He was shrewd. So yeah, he was a good man to lead this. Now, so Piedmont Sardinia joins the Crimean War again because Cavour thought that by joining them, this will create allies in the unification against or ousting of Austria and eventually the Bourbons from this peninsula. So, um, so with the alliances that he made, okay, the first step was to kick Austria out of a good portion of northern Italy, with the exception of Venice. Okay, while this is happening, a socialist named Giuseppe Garibaldi and his red shirts are going to start liberating the Bourbon, or liberate the kingdom of Two Sicilies, which was controlled by the Bourbons. Okay, kicking the Bourbons out of southern Italy. So Garibaldi is uniting southern Italy. Cavour is uniting northern Italy, and they are eventually going to move to the center, which was controlled by the Pope. Okay, eventually Cavour is going to use nationalism to say, hey, we need to come together and we need to become one. Cavour is going to side with Prussia against during the Austrian-Prussian Wars and the French-Prussian Wars, the Franco-Prussian Wars. In both wars, Cavour is going to side with Prussia because by supporting the winning side, figured that he could support, or he could get Italy unified, and that's exactly what's going to happen. Okay, eventually Venice is going to be lost, or excuse me, during the Franco-Austria War, Venice will be given to Italy, okay, because Italy joined on the Prussian side. They didn't fight, they just supported them. So Venice is going to be given to Italy, and because Italy supports Prussia in the Franco-Prussian War, eventually the Papal States will be given over to Italy. And this is going to unify Italy. And Italy will be unified all under one control by the King, Victor Emmanuel. The Vatican City will be its own separate entity. Okay, but understand the Catholic Church does not recognize Italy as a state until after World War I. But there are lots of problems in Italy even after unification. Northern Italy is much more refined, much more advanced when it comes to their economy. Their focus is industry, and whereas Southern Italy is focused on farming. So Northern Italy is much richer than Southern Italy. And because of all this unification process, the government is now in debt, and they don't have large amounts of money. They don't have large amounts of industry yet. So all this will lead problems in Italy in 1871 when they do unify, and those problems will really continue all the way through after World War One, when a rise of the fascists come to power. So when we look at German unification, let's look at the Germanic area. The Germanic states basically were 39 individual states that made up this area. The two most prominent states would be Austria and Prussia. Okay, now neither of these two countries or these two states wanted unification. Okay, the Zollverein, which was established in the beginning of the 1800s, was this economic union of most of the Germanic states, but not Austria. And the Zollverein early on really tried to unify as one big country, but that failed when Prussia did not want to unify. Well, in 1862, okay, Bismarck becomes the Prime Minister of Prussia, which means he's for the most part the head of the German Confederation, because Prussia being the most powerful country there, but Austria is trying to also be as powerful. Well, Bismarck wanted to enhance the military of Prussia. It's gone down since the time of the Soldier King. So he wanted to enhance the military, and he also wanted to extend the territory of Prussia. Now, Bismarck was a strict conservative. He hated liberalism, and of course he hated republicanism. Okay, but he thought he needed a strong army. And eventually, maybe having a strong army would lead us to a unified Germany, which he was okay with, believe it or not. But it had to be done on his terms. Okay, so he goes to the Reichstag, which was the German parliament, and he does his famous blood and iron speech, basically convincing the liberals of the Reichstag, which the Reichstag was controlled by the liberals, saying that we need a new military because for patriotism. Okay, we need to protect our culture. We need to unify the Germanic states and all this kind of good stuff. It's basically trying to guilt them to saying, hey, if you don't vote for us, you're not patriotic. So he does his blood and iron speech, and they do give him his money. Once this occurs, this starts the unification process. Okay, and there's really basically 4 or so different steps leading to the German unification process. And again, just like with Italy, you don't have to worry about each step. And his goal is to basically unify all the areas of the Germanic people, with the exception of Austria. So in the first step, he goes to war with Denmark for an area called Holstein and Schleswig, which were Germanic areas controlled by Denmark. And he decisively wins this by having Austria do all the fighting, basically. Okay, remember, Bismarck was a realpolitik. He did not want to look like the aggressor, so he had other countries look aggressive and made Prussia look like they were just being, what's the term I'm looking for? Wanted Prussia just to look like they're being defensive, I guess you could say. All these other countries are attacking them, so we got to defend our honor. So in this first step, the war with Denmark, Schleswig, and Holstein are won. One is given to Austria, the other is given to Prussia. Now the next step is to get rid of Austria so that Prussia has all the power within the German Confederation. So Bismarck provokes Austria to declare war on Prussia, and that's exactly what the new governor, or the new emperor, of Austria does. Franz Joseph declares war on Prussia. Okay, but Austria is no match for Prussia, and Austria is defeated. Okay, when this occurs, Bismarck is going to dissolve the German Confederation and create the Northern German Confederation, which is basically all the states of the former German Confederation now under the control of Prussia, with the exception of some of the southern states like Bavaria, who stayed loyal to Austria for now. Okay, this is the war that Italy supported Prussia, and when Austria loses, Italy gets Venice. We talked about that in the last slide. The last war for German unification was to obtain the area of Alsace-Lorraine, which was controlled by France. This place is rich in natural resources. We've talked about it in the past with the 30 Years' War, and now Germany wants it because that'll help fulfill the blood and iron speech. Okay, so of course France totally opposed German unification because France did not want to see a very strong Germany, because that would make it a very powerful state. Well, there was some issues with the Spanish throne. Hohenzollern was next in line to the Spanish throne. France was Napoleon III was upset with this, and there's a whole conflict that goes between these two countries, and eventually the Hohenzollern is taken off consideration for the Spanish throne, but Napoleon wants it. Napoleon basically wants what's the term I'm looking for? An apology. Okay, because Napoleon's like, I would have a Hohenzollern member or country on all sides of me except for the West, because that's the ocean, and that's not good. Well, that's when Bismarck takes the apology letter called the Eames Dispatch that the Kaiser had created, changes it around to make it insulting the French, and when Napoleon gets this, he gets upset and he declares war on Prussia. Okay, this is the Franco-Prussian War. And again, Prussia is too strong for France. Literally, Prussia comes into France, easily takes over Paris, and captures Napoleon II. and Napoleon III, I apologize. Napoleon III is forced to abdicate the throne, and the Second French Empire is gone. Okay. Now, with that said, this unifies Germany after the war with France. Okay. It also, because of this war, because of this war, um, France gives Rome to Italy, and Italy is also unified. Okay, to throw salt in the wound, um, the Kaiser is going to be crowned Kaiser Wilhelm the first king of Germany, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. So this is important. German unification is so important because now the balance of power in Europe is now destroyed. Germany, within a couple decades, becomes just as strong as England. Okay, France becomes very weak. Germany just really industrializes and rivals England. Okay, now there's a new balance of power between Germany and England. Everyone else is kind of left behind. Very important. So, um, the Austrian Empire is a very diverse empire. There's many different cultures that are living within the borders, and many of these cultures have tried to revolt against the emperor, and they've all failed. But the biggest non-German culture in the Austrian Empire is the Magyars, or the Hungarians. And even though in 1848 they had a revolt and they were put down by the Austrian Empire, by the Austrian government, along with about 100,000 Russian soldiers, they're still upset and they still want to become independent. So, and they're causing a lot of problems with the emperor Franz Joseph. Franz Joseph came to power in 1848, which is another reason why there were so many revolts there in 1848. Figure a new king and that would be an easy pickings because he was young. But anyway, from 1848 to 1867, the Magyars are causing lots of problems for the Austrian government. Finally, in 1867, in this compromise, Franz Joseph says, "Fine, you guys want to be independent? How about this? Let's meet halfway. Hungary is still going to be within the empire, but it's now going to have its own king. So I still control you guys. The Austrian government still controls you, but you have your own king. So you have this little piece of autonomy within this empire." And the Magyars were okay with that. So now we're going to create a dual monarchy where you have Franz Joseph, the leader of the empire, and then the Hungarian kings. Okay, you don't have to know their names; they're not important. Okay, so now, but you have, and basically, they're always going to come up with solutions together. They're both going to agree. So it helps the Austrian king, the Austrian emperor, I should say, Franz Joseph, and it also subdues the Magyars. Okay, but the other groups in this empire are like, hey, what about us? You know, the Slavic people, the Bohemians, and other people are like, hey, what about us? But we're not going to get like a triple monarchy or anything like that. But that trouble will be troublesome down the road when Austria loses in 1917 as part of the losing side of World War One. La Belle Epoch, or the Beautiful Era. Okay, this is the time period of about 1870s through World War One, 1914. Okay, it's called the Beautiful Era because it's the era of the middle class. The middle class is starting to make large amounts of money through the Second Industrial Revolution. Okay, and this is an era of the middle class. They are the arbiters of taste. They explain what's in and what's out, what's hot and what's not when it comes to style, when it comes to politics, when it comes to society. They set the trends, okay? Because they're making large amounts of money because of the second industrial revolution, their lives get easier. They don't need to work large amounts of hours. There's going to be some new activity called leisure, okay, where we're going to have organized sports come to fruition. The Olympics comes to fruition. Wrestling, soccer, all are invented or are become popular during this time period. Okay, and of course, with the La Belle Epoque, you have the second industrial revolution. This is so much bigger and so much more important than the first industrial revolution because the first industrial revolution really focused on textiles. Second industrial revolution focused on everything. You name it. Yeah, it was powered by electricity, oil, and gas. So factories are now going to really focus and really be able to produce more things because of new inventions like electricity, oil, and gas. Other new inventions during this time period, Bessemer steel. Bessemer steel replaces iron because it's cheaper, easier to produce, and it is more flexible. Okay, so there's the variety of uses that could come out of it. Also, chemicals, okay, like fertilizers, soaps, explosives, are invented during this time period. And of course, really the two major epicenters of the second industrial revolution is going to be the UK and Germany, okay, without a doubt. Later on, around World War I, the United States comes in. But it's really Germany and the UK as the biggest producers. The UK has always been the workshop of the world, but now Germany is starting to challenge that status. Of course, with all these new inventions, people are living better, okay, and we're starting to see a population explosion, okay, literally more than doubles within a 100-year period. Cities are the epicenters of life. Large amounts of people are going to live in the city or near a city, and because of sanitation, because of redevelopment of the cities, cities are starting to get a little bit better, but they're still pretty rough, okay. Second half of the 1800s is when you're going to start seeing a rise in socialism as well, because working class people are starting to get their voices heard, and you're going to start, because of the deplorable living and working conditions, you're going to see lots of revolts and people wanting change. So if you were to compare the first and second industrial revolutions, there are massive differences. First industrial revolution, of course, everything is done by hand, which eventually leads to a machine. Whereas the second industrial revolution is you're having machines that are going to get more automated, meaning with the use of the assembly line, for example, and the use of electricity. You don't need water power or steam or animals to work your machines. Now you have automation, electricity, um, the assembly line. We're moving from textiles focus to more of a steel focus, and you can see the rest here. Some of the new inventions that you see here, of course, the more modern inventions. Standard of living is going to be bad in both. Not going to lie, it's awful in the first industrial revolution. It's bad, but improving in the second industrial revolution because of sanitation laws, because of the sewer systems. You are going to have the expansion of the middle class. Because the middle class are making money in the cities, they want their cities to be better. So we know La Belle Epoque was the age of the middle class. The middle class represented about 20 to 25% of the population. Um, because because of the second industrial revolution, they're making large amounts of money, and that money is not being spent on things that were necessary, like food, because they're buying food, but the food is actually cheaper now because of better production. So because of cheaper food, they get to spend more money on the non-necessities, things that make your life better, more clothing, more decoration for the houses, furniture, you name it. Okay, it's the luxury items. 75 to 80% of the population will be considered lower class. And these are the people that supported the trade unions. Most of them supported socialism. So there is still a big divide, but it's that middle class that's starting to really get a lot of influence, because in places like England, they are getting the right to vote as well. So the middle class, age of the middle class, the La Belle Epoque is the age of the middle class. They are the status quo I mentioned before. They are the white collar workers. White collar workers are people that work in the offices. They don't work necessarily with their hands. Usually, they could go to university, or they could have like a job that just does not entail hard labor. Lawyers, doctors, bankers, you name it. These are all types of white collar workers. A lot of them will need college education, university education, but some of them don't. Now, to address the needs of the biggest populations, meaning the poor, a lot of countries are going to become welfare states. This is to address the rising popularity of socialism, and also to appease the unions. Unions are starting to gain more rights for the workers, more also better working conditions. So a lot of conservative governments and liberal governments are starting to create welfare states, where the state is going to give help to those that need it. Okay. And now in modern times, every state is considered a welfare state, because the definition of a welfare state is giving things that are necessary to the people. For example, having free education is part of a welfare state. Having old age insurance, having Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, things like that are all parts of welfare states. And every country is now really a welfare state. And that started off with Bismarck and England, both creating these welfare programs to help those in need. Okay. And it's really to try to stop the popularity of the socialists. So instead of voting socialists, you see these conservatives and liberals that are doing these welfare programs. So the idea is, oh wow, look, they're doing these welfare programs. We like that. We're going to keep on voting for the conservatives or the liberals and not take our chances with the socialists. Okay, but socialism is growing without a doubt. In Europe, for the most part, most males are able to vote, including the poor. And that's another reason why countries are starting to do welfare states, because a large majority of the lower classes are starting to vote. So vote for those in power that are giving you stuff. Okay. Now for women, really, you're starting to see the suffragette movement. You're starting to see women's rights movements. It does go slower than the universal male suffrage that we talked about. But women's rights, you're going to see, some women are calling for equality. Some women are just saying, hey, give us a better pay, make our pay somewhat equal to men. Some people are saying, no, we want the same rights socially as men. Okay, so now for women, for example, women, they're starting to have fewer kids because they realize kids are expensive. So like 2 to 3 kids is generally the norm. Working women were generally single. They worked in the factories or teaching or nursing. And a lot of times women, especially of the middle and upper class, well, middle class in particular, once they're married, they left the workforce and they stayed home to be in charge of the house and the children and such. Okay, raising the children. Legality for divorce is in the non-Roman Catholic states starts occurring. Prior to this, to get a divorce for a woman really had to do a lot of things, show a lot of abuse, show a lot of bad things that the husband did. Now, in the non-Roman Catholic states, okay, you're starting to see women being able to get a divorce. Okay, the Catholic countries were slower when it came to women's rights because they believed in a very conservative viewpoint of the man is dominant and the female just takes care of the house and the children. But you are seeing the suffragette movement really take hold. Okay, Fawcett, Millicent, um, um, who else? And others that are really calling for women's rights. John Stuart Mill, even a man who's calling for rights. Emmeline Pankhurst calling for women's rights. Okay. With the rise of socialism, there are different types of socialism that we're going to see. Socialism really comes into play after French Revolution. It is really the idea of the haves versus the have-nots. It's the lower class versus everyone else. How the lower classes feel that they do all the work and they should share the profits and the resources, etc. Um, now, we have three types of socialism, and all socialisms will fall into one of the different categories. I think I covered this last unit as well, but we have utopian socialism, Marxism, and evolutionary socialism. Out of the three, evolutionary socialism is probably the most successful out of all socialism types. Utopian socialism comes during the first half of the 1800s. It's the idea of creating a society of everyone is equal. There's no need for laws, police, private property because everyone shares in the wealth. It's based on Sir Thomas More's ideas in his book Utopia, hence the name Utopian Society. Fouer, Blanc, and Owen all dictate this or are examples of utopian socialisms. Um, Basically, it says, there's no need for a revolution. If the owners of the factories just change their way of thinking, anything can happen. Owenism, in particular, Blanchism to a degree, really do they're tried out in Scotland, or Owenism is in Scotland and the United States, Blanchism is in France, etc. But they just don't. It doesn't work. It doesn't work because the factory owners only cared about one thing, that's making profit, not spending money on housing or schools and things like that. So, an utopian socialist is all about basically the communities working together for the common good. Marxism is the idea that a revolution is needed. Okay, Karl Marx basically in his book Communist Manifesto basically said that history is just all about struggles, and you have capitalism and eventually it'll turn into socialism, because you have the greedy and then the not greedy, and it's a bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. Um, it's really Marxism is based on Rousseau's ideas that men are good, but society corrupts them. Um, Marx believed that the bourgeoisie severely oppressed the proletariat. Marx also believed that women were oppressed twice, both by society and by men. Marx basically believes that the only way to bring equality to society is that the proletariat needs to be educated and that they need to revolt. A revolution is necessary to cause change, according to Marx. Um, and a revolution is needed to basically have a classless society where maybe you have a small communist type government, okay, that makes decisions for the common person. Okay. Um, Dictatorship of the proletariat means basically you have this small government making what is right, making all the decisions for the individuals. And last but not least, evolutionary socialism. This is where it's changed over time. Basically, slow change, like you vote in socialists to office, or governments start bringing in socialist ideas like old age insurance and unemployment insurance and healthcare and free education. Okay, and you do that by voting in socialists into office, and then they bring their ideas, and then more socialists are brought in, and so on and so forth. So it's the gradual change over time. Out of all three of these, the evolutionary socialists are probably the most successful. You know, it's because this is where most countries will gain socialistic ideas through evolutionary socialists. Marxism, this idea of revolution, we've seen a couple times in Cuba and Russia and such, but for the most part, they're not successful. Utopian socialists, these were experimented over throughout the years, but not highly successful. After France's loss in the Franco-Prussian War, the Second French Empire is eliminated, and the Third French Republic is formed. When the Third French Republic is formed, they realize that Paris is a hotbed for craziness. Okay, Paris is the epicenter of like trouble and revolts. All the revolts always start in Paris. The Third French Republic, already on shaky grounds, being that they just lost this war, they thought that Paris was just too unsettled to have the capital there. So the Third French Republic decide that they're going to go to Versailles and have the capital of France at Versailles, at least for the time being until everything settles down. But the people of Paris, they hated that idea. They said if the government is in Versailles, they will not see the plight of the ordinary person, and that the ordinary person will never be heard. Okay, so the Parisians reject this government, and the Parisians they're going to call themselves the Communards, because the local government of Paris is called the Paris Commune, so they call themselves the Communards. This is going to be your first Marxist revolution to ever take place. Now, this brand new city that's been rebuilt is now going to be the epicenter of a war, a civil war, where the goal is to create a new country called Paris in the center of France. So there'll be two separate countries. Well, the French military of the Third Republic is going to be way too strong for the Paris Commune, and they're going to be put down. Okay, they're going to be suppressed. Again, the major important thing of this is that the Paris Commune Revolution of 1871 is going to be the first Marxist revolt. Okay, and it's going to be used as an example of what to do and what not to do for the Russians during the Russian Revolution. Now, so the Third French Republic is formed. It's the shakiest of all governments that France will have, because it is going to rule during a time of unsettlingness, I guess, if that's a word. Anyway, another major problem that France is going to have is the Dreyfus affair. Okay, as the French were spying on the German embassy in Paris, they go through the German embassy's garbage, and they find papers that were French top secret papers. So they realize that somebody is helping the Germans spy on the French, as the French were spying on the Germans. Interesting, huh? But anyway, they do some exhaustive, quote unquote, exhaustive investigating, and they find that Alfred Dreyfus was the conspirator, was the spy that was selling secrets to the Germans. Now, in reality, he probably had nothing to do with this. Okay, the likelihood is that he had nothing to do with this. Why they chose him was they needed a scapegoat, and he was the highest ranking Jewish military officer. Okay, now anti-Semitism has been around throughout history. It's always been around, but this event is going to bring it to the forefront, which is another reason why the Third Republic is going to falter. It's going to have some trouble. So the Dreyfus affair becomes the trial of the century. People that are anti-Semitic are saying, yeah, he did it without a doubt. That Jew did it. Okay, those that are not anti-Semitic and say, well, where's the proof? There's no proof, or very little proof. He had a good alibi. He wasn't even in Paris when a lot of this was occurring. But a lot of people were saying, even those that were not anti-Semitic, They said, well, if the government said it's true, it's true. Yeah, no. But a lot of people said that he was guilty, not even listening to the evidence, but just because of his religion, which of course is bad. Well, a famous realist writer of the day, Emile Zola, he writes an article in the newspaper called J'accuse, or I accuse, okay, where he really points a finger at the French military leadership that says the only reason he is being accused of this is because of his religion. This was like, oh my gosh, everyone's like, holy crud, he's actually bringing this to the forefront. And of course, he gets arrested, and he's charged with libel. Um, but it was eye opening. People are like, well, maybe he didn't do it. Okay, and really, the public was divided on Dreyfus 50-50, whether he was guilty or not. Now, he is going to be found guilty, sent away, and eventually he's going to be exonerated of it, but it takes a long time. Now, what's important about this is it really deepens the political division, okay, between the upper classes and the lower classes. It also reveals that even though people are educated, anti-Semitism is still around, okay, whether they liked it or not, okay, or whether they knew it or not. I think a lot of people probably knew it, but it was one of those things that no one talked about, okay. Now, some people like Theodore Herzl, after the whole Dreyfus affair, is going to create this idea called Zionism, where Jews should be able to have their own country, their own state, where they could practice their religion and live peacefully without anti-Semitism. Okay, so Theodore Herzl creates this idea of creating a Jewish state, which of course down the road we'll call it Israel. So let's talk about England. The United Kingdom, basically by 1914, or the start of World War One, most males can vote by now. They've created a welfare state with their health programs and old age insurance, and you name it. There are two prime ministers during the Belle Epoch period: William Gladstone and Benjamin Disraeli. And Gladstone was the liberal prime minister who wanted to create free schools and other reforms that were left over from the Chartist movement, whereas Disraeli was conservative, but he also addressed some of the concerns of the working classes, like he wanted to create better public health reforms, the Artisan Dwelling Act, Public Health Acts, etc. Well, one of the biggest questions at this point was Ireland. Ireland was starting to see a movement where the Irish were trying to gain their independence from the United Kingdom. And Ireland has been with the United Kingdom since 1801. But now at the end of the 1800s, you're starting to see a movement to get rid of Ireland, or for Ireland to get rid of the United Kingdom, okay, and be their own separate country. At this point, the Roman Catholics in Ireland were being heavily suppressed. Most of them could not own their own property. Only Protestants could. So they really had very few rights in Ireland. And people are wanting to become independent. But no one in Parliament wants to address it. Finally, William Gladstone, the Prime Minister at the time, said, okay, fine. Why don't we go for a vote for Home Rule? Whether Ireland should be have their own government. And it gets voted down by both liberals and conservatives overwhelmingly. And this vote goes on and on for many different times throughout the years. And finally, right before World War One, Gladstone or the vote, I should say, will happen. From the original vote by Gladstone to 1914, there have been some amendments, like they allowed Ireland to have their own parliament, but they're still part of the United Kingdom, very similar to what Scotland has. So it's kind of like they have their own government, but they're still part of the United Kingdom. But finally, in 1914, Ireland will gain their independence. But because of the war that was going to start soon, Um, Ireland was asked not to be independent yet until after the war so that they could help the United Kingdom out during the war. And that was fine with them. Okay, so the Irish question is important because this is how Ireland eventually does gain their independence. Now, the island of Ireland will be divided up. The northeastern part of Ireland, the upper quarter of it, is going to stay loyal to the United Kingdom, and the other three-fourths of the island will become its own independent country called Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, as it's called. The part that stays loyal to the United Kingdom is going to be called Northern Ireland. Well, in Germany, under the age of Bismarck, 1871 to 1890, Bismarck is going to create a welfare state, which means unemployment, healthcare, free education, to try to stop the socialist movement. Well, also he's going to really put forward a plan for industrialization, okay, that is easily matches England. Okay, so by 1890, okay, 20 years or so, they were able to match and supersede the English industrialization. Okay. Now, he Bismarck was known for really working with large amounts of people. Okay, he worked with the Junkers, which are your conservative landowners. He worked with the progressive liberals that wanted to give people more rights. He worked with the SDP, or the Social Democratic Party, and created the healthcare and unemployment and schools. He worked with the Central Party, which are the Catholics. So during his reign, he knew that alliances are better than adversaries. So he's going to really focus on all these different political groups that are part of the Reichstag, and get things done. Now, besides that, he also, like I said, he created alliances, not enemies. He created alliances with other countries to try to maintain a balance of power in Europe. So he wanted to avoid war at all costs, okay, which is why he's going to align himself with Russia and Austria and France and all these other countries, okay? And eventually most of these alliances will go away. And World War I will eventually occur. Probably his biggest failure is the Kulturkampf. The Kulturkampf was this idea that he thought that the Catholic Church was way too powerful. So he wanted to reduce the power of the Catholic Church in a country that was religious. You know, half of it was Catholic, half of it was Protestant. But it's going to anger people so much, even the Protestants. It's going to anger them because people are like, wait a second, we like you, but don't mess with our religion. Okay, it may not be our religion, but what's next? The Protestant religions, the Lutheran religion? Don't mess with religion. And it really does become one of his biggest failures during his reign. Over in Russia, from the mid-century onward to 1917, you're going to have four different czars: Nicholas I, Alexander II, Alexander III, and Nicholas II. Alexander III and Nicholas I were very strict conservatives, and they went by the motto of autocracy, orthodoxy, and Russification. They were very conservative, and they believed that the Russian Tsar is the only one in control. So they believed in autocratic rule. They believed in the Russian Orthodox religion being the only religion in the Russian Empire, and they believed that all people within the Russian Empire should practice the Russian culture. Now, so when they rule, they're really going to enforce this, kind of very similar to Peter the Great, when he forced everyone to practice European culture. But then during the same time period, you have some liberal rulers. Alexander II and Nicholas II were both liberal rulers who did not go by this necessarily. Now, what's going to happen is that the last reigning czar of Russia, Nicholas II, was very weak. He was very similar to Louis the 16th. Okay, there was a lot of going ons in Russia. The people were not being heard. The population was poor. There was lack of food, education, the necessities, and really the government wasn't addressing the needs of the people. Okay, what's going to happen in 1905? Russia is going to lose the Russo-Japanese War. And when people heard that their country lost to a non-European country, for the first country to ever do that, it is going to anger people. Okay, it's going to anger people. They're going to protest, and eventually the government is going to try to get rid of the protests by creating what's called by shooting into the crowd, and this event is going to be called Bloody Sunday. Okay, now, so what's going to happen is this. Even though the government, Nicholas II is trying to do reforms, they're not strong enough. The 1905 revolution is really going to expose the weakness between the classes of the haves and have-nots. 96% of the population are the have-nots in Russia. Okay, they have nothing. Okay, and this worker strike called Bloody Sunday and the call for change that comes afterward, because now, even though a few hundred people did die in this, it's going to be blown out of proportion and used as propaganda by the people that are against the government. Okay, and when that occurs, Nicholas II says, "Fine, you know what? You want a constitution? I'll give you a constitution. You want to create a Duma, which is a parliament? I'll create a Duma. You want to legalize what do you call it? If you want to legalize political parties, I'll legalize it." Okay. So what's going to happen with Nicholas II is, his power is going to be weakened by this constitution, by the writing of the creation of the Duma, because now these political parties, like the Mensheviks, the Bolsheviks, the Cadets, etc., are really going to start weakening Nicholas II. Nicholas II was not a good ruler. He was not very intelligent, and he got a lot of influence from other people, including one of his advisors, a guy by the name of Rasputin. Okay, and all this will lead to the downfall of Nicholas II. Well, actually, also what leads to the downfall of Nicholas II is the horrible conditions that Russia is going to be in because of World War I. Okay, but Russia has a problem, and the problems aren't being addressed by the government. And if the government doesn't address problems of the people, the government's going to fail. And you're going to see that in the Second Russian Revolution of 1917. The First Russian Revolution, 1905, yes, it brings in some change, but it's not good enough. And the last topic of the Belle Epoch to talk about is the new sciences. Okay, some of these are controversial even to this day. Now, the first one, of course, being Charles Darwin and his idea of evolution. He believed that the fittest species of plants and animals will live longer than the weaker ones. Okay, it's this idea of natural selection. He basically says that every living thing struggles in life, and only those that are strong will survive. Okay. In his book Origin of Species, he does talk about biological evolution. Now, some people will take his ideas and twist them, okay, to justify racism, and those are called social Darwinists. Herbert Spencer is the founder of social Darwinism. He said that basically the best people over the not so good people will survive, just like the best companies over the not best companies. He says those people that are wealthy survive more than those that are not healthy or wealthy. Okay. Herbert Spencer is going to take Darwin's ideas and creates social Darwinism. His idea of survival of the fittest. He is the one that says survival of the fittest, not Darwin. Okay. He, um, he basically says certain groups of people are better off than others. Okay. Europeans are better off than other cultures, for example, he says. Okay. So his idea is going to be used to rationalize and justify racism, anti-Semitism, imperialism, militarism. Okay, his ideas will lead us to Rudyard Kipling's ideas of white man's burden. Okay, whereas a white man's duty to civilize those that are uncivilized, meaning the Asians and the Africans. Okay, so social Darwinism is this idea based off Darwin. It's not Darwin's ideas, but it's based off Darwin that basically is justifying racism. The bacterial revolution occurs with Louis Pasteur. He said that there's something called germs that you cannot see. That is what gets you sick, and the best way to get rid of germs in food and such is through heat. This is why we heat milk. We heat our food up to a certain degree because it kills the bacteria in it. Okay. Joseph Lister says that to stop germs from spreading, doctors should sterilize their utensils. Okay, and also sterilize wounds and such. Okay, and yes, this is where we get Listerine. Okay, the bacterial revolution is credited for saving who knows how many, but millions and millions of people. Okay, because now people understand what gets people sick. It's not that because you're poor you're sick. It's not because you're a certain group of people. No, it's bacteria that gets you sick. So if you don't want to get sick, clean. Okay, leave those dirty cities, those wretched, horrible cities. Clean the cities up, and that'll better the population. Other sciences during this time period would be Sigmund Freud. He developed psychoanalysis. He basically says that the unconscious was shaped during your early years, and that basically what drives you is sexuality that dominates life. Other scientists like Einstein created the theory of relativity in physics. Gregor Mendel, Mendel, created genetics. Max Planck created quantum physics. One thing that you should really look at when looking at these new sciences, connect these Darwin's ideas or these new sciences ideas with Newton's Principia. Okay, how do they change society? How do they change science? Okay, especially Newton versus Darwin. It caused lots of changes, and not just in science. So, with that said, this is the new sciences. This is La Belle Epoch. This is Unit 7. And believe it or not, this is AP Euro. Man, I miss saying that to you guys in person though. Okay. I hope these videos were helpful to you guys. I want to see you be successful, and when I get the results, I probably will be crying because I think you guys are going to do phenomenal. Okay. If you ever need anything, please let me know. I want to be there to help. I want to see you be successful. With that said, I'll see you on Wednesday during our Zoom session. Bye.